Hi folks, it's Friday again and time for a new video from me. Today I would like to introduce you to a Canon camera for the FD system from the T series, the Canon T70. This camera dates back to the early days of the introduction of microelectronics into camera systems, and you could even say into people's daily lives in general. This camera was introduced to the public in 1984. It was the time when Microsoft released Windows 1.0 and Apple introduced its legendary Macintosh 128K, also known as Macintosh 1984. The Canon T70 was a major influence on the 35mm SLR cameras that followed, thanks to its built-in microcomputer and large LCD screen and control buttons. Canon sales brochures trumpeted photography enters the computer age and bragged of the T70's advanced onboard computer. The T70's onboard computer has an 8-bit custom microcomputer with 1,200 commands. It has 12 by 2 kilobytes of ROM and 8 by 16 bytes of RAM. The T70 featured TTL metering with shutter speed priority, and the dual metering system offered a choice between center-weighted average metering and partial center metering. In 1984, the camera received Japan's Good Design Award from the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and the European Camera of the Year Award. Thank you very much for your interest. You would greatly support my work for you if you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. Take a look at the Canon T70 in detail now. Have fun with it. As you have just seen, the T70 uses the Canon FD bayonet. All Canon FD and NFD lenses can be used without restriction. You can see the differences between the Canon FD and NFD bayonet in the diagram below. The camera was also offered in combination with kit lenses according to preference. The camera kit included a NFD 3.5 to 4.5 35 to 70mm lens, or a NFD 3.5 to 4.5 28 to 55mm. Here you can see the 35 to 70mm kit lens. The operation of the camera is logically structured and therefore the Canon T70 is easy to handle. To use the automatic exposure programs, make sure that the aperture ring of the lens is set to the A position. The most important camera controls are located on the left-hand side of the camera. Together with the up and down buttons on the right-hand side of the camera, all settings are made. To switch the camera on, press the small button to unlock the slide switch. If you push this button down and move the slide switch one position forward, the camera switches on. At the same time, you have activated the center-weighted integral metering. If you move the slide switch up a further step as described above, you have activated selective area metering. This metering method locks the exposure value as long as the shutter release button and the other metering button, which I will show you later, are pressed lightly. The exposure is only measured in the small circle visible in the viewfinder. This is useful, for example, for subjects that are in front of a very bright or dark background. The last position of the slide switch activates the self-timer. This activates the center-weighted integral metering and the automatic aperture control. Slide the switch to the look position to switch off the camera. You can check the battery power by pressing and holding the BC button. It is displayed in 4 levels. 3 and 2 bars mean sufficient battery power. If the bar is flashing or if you no longer see a bar, replace the battery. The Canon T70 requires only 2 AA or Mignon batteries for all functions. And you can easily find these almost anywhere in the world. Well done, Canon! The polarity with which the batteries must be inserted is marked on the battery compartment. The camera does not offer DX encoding. Therefore, it cannot automatically scan and adjust the film speed. It also does not know the film length. The respective film speed must therefore be set manually. This is done simply by pressing the ISO button on the left side of the camera while simultaneously pressing the up or down button on the left side of the camera. The film speed can be set in thirds in a range from ISO 12 to 1600. If you hold down the up button, the camera will cycle through all possible ISO settings up to ISO 1600, and if you hold down the down button, you will at some point reach ISO 12. You can access 4 different exposure metering programs by pressing the mode button and simultaneously pressing the up or down button. The shutter priority mode is available. Here you pre-select the exposure time using the up and down buttons and the camera controls the appropriate aperture. There are also 3 different automatic program modes. With the wide program automatic, the camera tries to use the smallest possible aperture so that the largest possible image area is in focus for the human eye. With teleprogram automatic, a fast shutter speed is set where possible so that movements can be frozen. Program automatic, on the other hand, ensures a balanced combination of shutter speed and aperture. In this small example you can see how the camera adjusts the shutter speed and thus also the aperture within the framework of the existing lighting conditions. However, the aperture value can only be seen in the viewfinder. The shutter speed, on the other hand, can only be seen on the display. Back to shutter priority automatic exposure. If you have selected this exposure mode, you can easily select the desired shutter speed using the up and down buttons. The camera automatically adjusts the aperture. If no suitable aperture is found for the pre-selected shutter speed because the subject is either too bright or too dark, the camera automatically adjusts the shutter speed. Please note, however, that this may result in camera shake if the shutter speed is too slow. A guideline is to use the reciprocal of the focal length as the longest shutter speed. For example, 1/60th of a second for a 15mm lens. If no shutter speed and aperture combination is possible, the camera warns you with various flashing indicators. Please refer to the following pages of the operating instructions. You can still see the film level marker on the right-hand side. This is particularly important in macro photography, as the set distance refers to this point, not to the distance from the bayonet to the subject or from the lens to the subject. If you press the shutter release button to the first pressure point, you activate the exposure metering. If you press the shutter release button all the way down, you take a photo and the film is transported to the next image. If you keep the shutter release button pressed, the camera takes continuous pictures at approximately 0.7 pictures per second. The camera reacts to changing light conditions and adjusts the exposure time, while you are exposing continuous shots. After you have shot the last frame of your film, the camera will beep and flash to let you know and ask you to rewind the film. I switch the camera off first. Then move a small slide switch at the bottom of the camera in the direction of the arrow and press the silver-colored button at the same time. Now I switch the camera on again. The camera now automatically rewinds the film. The film is completely rewound into the spool, so if you want to develop the film yourself, you have to take out a small piece first. To open the camera, simply press the round button on the left-hand side and slide the slide switch downwards with a smooth finger movement. As you can see here, the new film is simply inserted and pulled forward to the orange marking. Then close the camera and it automatically transports the film to the first frame. Don't forget to enter the correct or desired film speed afterwards. Here you can see the shutter of the Canon T70. It is a vertical metal focal plane. Be careful, do not touch it, otherwise it will break. You can choose 1/1000 of a second to 2 seconds in bulb. Bulb mode counts seconds on the top LCD up to 30. After 30 seconds, it starts counting up again from 0 and adds one of the 3 film motion dashes. If you add 30 for each dash, the display reads up to 120 seconds. Too bad there's no conventional cable release socket. You will need the Canon remote switch T60. This remote shutter release is also used by the first Canon EOS models. A function for more advanced photographers is the tracking metering. To do this, you need to set the aperture ring from the A position to any aperture value. An M symbol will now flash in the viewfinder and will shown on the display, and the camera will suggest an aperture to match the selected time. You do not have to follow this suggestion. This procedure is particularly useful in situations where you want to deliberately underexpose or overexpose. I almost forgot to tell you about an extremely important button, the exposure metering button. Pressing the button activates the light meter. As usual, the camera displays the aperture selected for the shutter speed in the viewfinder. Now you can change the time with the up and down buttons, and if you hold down the exposure metering button, you can see in the viewfinder how the camera adjusts the aperture. However, you will not see the shutter speed in the viewfinder, only an overexposure or underexposure warning. This means there is a risk that your image will be correctly exposed, but your subject will be unusable due to blurring, for example. So always keep an eye on the exposure time. The function of the exposure metering button can also be blocked by turning a switch to the L position. My conclusion at the end of the video, the Canon T70 was another milestone from Canon. An easy-to-use camera that offers the most important functions, even if some photographers would certainly have preferred an aperture priority over a shutter priority. In my opinion, this camera is recommended for beginners, but also for advanced photographers who decide to use the fantastic Canon FD system. Thanks again for your time and interest. See you in the next video.